Welcome to the World Wire Update YT. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon for more updates and thrilling short scenes. The story of this monumental legal battle began in the spring of 2025, a season that would mark a turning point in American economic history. As cherry blossoms bloomed across Washington, D.C., a sense of anticipation and uncertainty filled the air, hinting at the seismic changes about to unfold. In a nationally televised address, President Trump announced the Liberation Day tariffs, an aggressive and sweeping set of taxes on imports from over 70 countries. The announcement sent shockwaves through both domestic and international markets, signaling a dramatic shift in U.S. trade policy. The administration's stated goal was to rebalance trade relationships that it deemed unfair to the United States. For years, officials argued, American workers and industries had suffered under lopsided agreements, and now, the time had come to restore what they called true reciprocity. These reciprocal tariffs were not uniform. Some goods faced a 10% levy, while others saw increases as high as 50%, depending on the country of origin and the type of product. The complexity of the new rules left importers scrambling to understand how their businesses would be affected. The legal justification for these sweeping measures came from the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA. Invoking this rarely used authority, President Trump declared the nation's persistent trade deficit a national emergency, arguing that urgent action was required to protect American interests. But the tariffs didn't stop there. A second set of levies, known as the trafficking tariffs, specifically targeted Canada, China, and Mexico. The administration accused these countries of failing to curb the flow of illegal fentanyl into the United States, linking trade penalties to the ongoing opioid crisis. This dual-front approach, combining economic and security concerns, set the stage for an unprecedented clash over the limits of presidential power, the reach of trade law, and the future of global commerce. Legal scholars, politicians, and business leaders braced for a battle that would test the very foundations of American governance. The swift and sweeping implementation of the tariffs caught businesses and consumers off guard. From small family-owned shops to multinational corporations, nearly every sector of the economy was suddenly forced to adapt to a new and uncertain reality. Prices on everything from electronics to groceries began to climb, as import costs were set to rise dramatically. Retailers rushed to update price tags, and consumers braced for higher bills at the checkout counter. The administration insisted that this short-term pain was a necessary sacrifice for long-term economic strength and independence. Officials argued that American industries would ultimately benefit from a more level playing field, even as critics warned of inflation and global retaliation. Yet for those on the front lines of the global supply chain, dock workers, truck drivers, and logistics managers, the immediate future looked more uncertain than ever. As the world watched, the stage was set for a legal and economic showdown that would shape the nation's destiny for years to come. For American families, tariffs were a tangible reality, not just economic theory. Prices of everyday goods like shoes and kitchen appliances climbed, straining household budgets. Grocery shopping became more expensive as many food products are sourced internationally. Coffee prices, for instance, rose over 20%, making daily rituals costlier. Families faced tough choices, cutting back on essentials to afford basics. Some importers stopped carrying products, reducing consumer choice. Tariffs functioned as a regressive tax, hitting lower and middle-income households hardest. Wealthier families could absorb price increases, but for many it was devastating. The economic pressure was a persistent burden for millions trying to make ends meet. American businesses faced new challenges in the trade war. Companies relying on imports saw their costs soar, threatening profit margins. Terry Cycling, a small business, faced an existential threat with an additional $1.2 million in costs. Even larger companies like Learning Resources faced $100 million in added costs. Businesses inserted tariff clauses in contracts, creating instability. Some, like Ann Clark, were insulated by domestic sourcing, but many weren't. The tariffs created a divide between those who could rely on domestic sourcing and those exposed to international trade policy's volatility. The legal battle over tariffs questioned who has the power to tax. The Constitution grants Congress the power to set tariffs, not the president. The Trump administration cited IEEPA, claiming it allowed tariff imposition during emergencies. Opponents argued this was an overreach of executive power, twisting the law's meaning. The case set up a major separation of powers conflict. If the Supreme Court sided with the president, it would allow executive tax imposition without Congress. A ruling against the president would reaffirm Congress's authority over trade and taxation. At the Supreme Court, the heart of the nation's legal system, arguments swirled around the true meaning and intent of the law at issue. Justices listened intently as both sides presented their cases, each interpretation carrying profound consequences for the balance of power in government. The administration, determined to defend its actions, argued that the president's authority under IEPA was intentionally broad. They insisted that in times of national emergency, the executive branch must have the flexibility to act swiftly and decisively, even if that means imposing tariffs or other economic measures. According to their view, tariffs were not just a fiscal tool, but a necessary instrument to regulate imports and protect national interests during a crisis. They claimed that restricting presidential power in such moments could endanger the country's security and economic stability. Opponents, however, pointed to the Constitution's clear language. They argued that the framers deliberately gave the power to tax and impose tariffs to Congress, not the president, to ensure a system of checks and balances. Allowing the president to bypass Congress and impose taxes through an emergency act, they warned, would fundamentally upend this carefully crafted design and threaten the separation of powers. For the challengers, the absence of the word tariff in IEPA was not a minor detail but a decisive point. They argued that if Congress had intended to grant such sweeping power, it would have said so explicitly. The challengers insisted that it was the court's duty to interpret the law faithfully and enforce the constitutional limits on executive authority, no matter how urgent the circumstances. Beyond the legal arguments, the impact of the tariffs was felt across the country. The measures caused real economic harm, not just theoretical debate, as communities struggled with the fallout. Businesses faced the threat of bankruptcy, and families saw their everyday expenses rise, making it harder to make ends meet. Ultimately, the Supreme Court was tasked with a grave responsibility to protect the constitutional order, prevent abuse of executive power, and ensure that the nation's foundational principles remained intact for future generations. In a landmark decision, the Supreme Court ruled against the Trump administration. The court concluded IEPA doesn't grant the president authority to impose tariffs. The power to tax is a legislative function, not transferable to the executive. The ruling dismantled the administration's arguments rejecting tariff imposition under IEPA. The court invoked the major questions doctrine, requiring clear congressional authorization for significant actions. The decision drew a firm line between presidential and congressional powers. The ruling struck down the Liberation Day and trafficking tariffs, declaring them unconstitutional. The Supreme Court's decision will have far-reaching economic consequences, impacting various sectors of the economy. This landmark ruling is expected to bring about significant changes in how trade policies are formulated and implemented in the United States. With tariffs nullified, imported goods prices are expected to fall, relieving American families. This reduction in prices will make everyday essentials more affordable, easing the financial burden on households across the nation. Businesses like Tariffs can reinvest without massive tariff bills. This newfound financial freedom will allow small and medium-sized enterprises to expand their operations, hire more employees, and contribute to economic growth. The ruling reshapes future presidential powers, requiring congressional collaboration for tariffs. This change ensures that trade policies will be more balanced and representative of the nation's interests. It restores the traditional legislative process for trade policy. Lawmakers will now have a more active role in shaping trade agreements, leading to more comprehensive and well-considered policies. The decision signals a move towards stable international trade relations. By fostering a more predictable trade environment, it encourages foreign investment and strengthens global partnerships. It asserts U.S. trade policy will follow the rule of law, not unilateral actions. This adherence to legal principles ensures that trade decisions are fair, transparent, and accountable. The case was a test of America's checks and balances system. It demonstrated the judiciary's crucial role in maintaining the balance of power among the branches of government. By reaffirming Congress's authority, the court reinforced foundational government principles. This decision underscores the importance of a collaborative approach to governance. The decision ensures shared power between government branches, as intended by the Constitution. It highlights the enduring relevance of the Constitution in guiding the nation's political and economic landscape.